Welcome to the Prison Professors Podcast. We serve people who face challenges with prosecution, sentencing, and prison. My co-founders are Sean Hopwood and Justin Paperny. My name is Michael Santos. We create digital content and our team offers individual consulting services. We also assist agencies that want to improve outcomes. To learn how we can help you, text the word PrisonPro to 44222. Again, text PrisonPro to 44222 and get our free brochure. You can also visit us at prisonprofessors.com or contact Justin at 818-424-2220. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Send confirmation that you reviewed our podcast and we'll send you a free digital book. Stay tuned for a 20 to 30-minute episode of Prison Professors. Welcome to Prison Professors. We are here to provide information that will help, inspire, and educate people who are either going into the criminal justice system, people who are in prison, or people who have come out of prison. Everybody we profile has had some experience. Ordinarily, there are people who experience the criminal justice system as a defendant or a prisoner, but they came back successfully. And at the end of the day, it's always the decisions that they make that put them on a track to success and help them overcome one of the greatest social injustices of our time, which I consider to be mass incarceration. Today, we are going to speak with an individual who did not experience the criminal justice system as a defendant. Instead, he has built a career trying to help people make the best decisions when they're going inside or they're inside. We're talking to attorney Peter Borenstein. He is with the Lifer Legal Clinic and the nonprofit Restorative Justice Fund. We're going to hear about both of those and about what Peter has learned through his work with hopes that we can all make better decisions. So Peter, welcome to Prison Professors. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and what got you interested in working with people who are going into the prison system?
Hi there. Thanks for having me on. So my background is working with young people who are involved with the criminal justice system. And also I had a pen pal in federal prison for almost 20 years. My dad was a lawyer, and one of his clients was down for 20 years for a drug offense. And we ended up corresponding for more than 20 years. And, he's out now. And so that's great. And so the way that the Lifer Legal Clinic started was I graduated from law school in 2014, and I was doing criminal justice reform policy work. And I wanted to do more legal work, right? I had gone through 3 years of law school and a lot of money, and I wanted to actually be a lawyer. So I ended up running free legal clinics at halfway houses here in Southern California, Los Angeles, and just meeting with guys who had just come out, mostly lifers, and almost immediately I saw an issue that I had never heard about, where guys were being stolen from because they were gone for so long. A sibling or an ex-wife or a business partner would essentially just determine that nothing would happen to them if they kind of took some of the prisoner's property, and they didn't. And so this was causing real problems for guys when they came out, because they imagined that they would have a house waiting for them, or that they would have a nest egg. But when they got out, it was disappeared. So they need a legal recourse to recover their stuff. And so once I kind of uncovered this as a issue that prisoners and formerly incarcerated people were having, I started reaching out to others. I started kind of sending stuff into prisons, trying to get a feel for how often and to what extent this was happening to guys. And then it just, I started getting letters all the time. I started meeting with formerly incarcerated people who had the same exact problem, and it kind of just grew from there.
Wow. Let's go. I'm interested in hearing about that, but I'm also interested in hearing about what you learned from this pen pal of yours who did 20 years in federal prison. Could you tell us a little bit about what he experienced while he was inside and how he prepared himself for returning to society after 20 years in federal prison?
Sure. So he is a really special guy, and he has kind of an amazing story. And he, he was really, really committed to keeping connections with people outside of prison alive. It's kind of amazing how hard he tried to make sure that, people didn't forget about him, that he was still around, and that he, the hope of coming out was still alive. He kind of got out kind of on a lark, right? No one was really, people were really surprised that he ended up getting out for a variety of reasons. But when he got out, I mean, it was like unbelievable, the foundation he had to be successful, right? He had another pen pal who he, managed to end up living with. He had a job lined up, right? He had really been intentional about his connections with people on the outside. And, inside, he kept his head down. He was a friendly guy. He was just trying to stay on the straight and narrow while he was down. So, because he held this hope really close to his chest that, one day he would get out. And he did. And it was, he's really tenacious, I guess is.
That's a great story. How long has he been home now?
Say again?
How long has he been home now?
He got out, 7 years ago. And again, like, no one knew he was getting out. So he just showed up at my parents' doorstep one day and was just like, I'm out. And it was really powerful, and he's doing great.
That is awesome. I love to tell that kind of story, and I hope that you will connect him with the Prison Professors podcast so we could learn a little bit more about that important decision he made to stay connected, build strong relationships, and come home, because all too often people go into the prison system with the idea that the best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside, and unfortunately that frequently leads to continuing cycles of struggle and failure, and it's our job to try and change that. But let's turn our attention now back to you, because you are really an amazing guy who has really told us a lot just in these first few minutes about an exciting career of going through law school, but instead of then going out and trying to make the big money, you chose to devote your time going into halfway houses and providing service to people in need. How was it that you were able to support yourself while you were doing so much voluntary work? Getting straight down to brass tacks. So, I mean, the way that I've been able to fund this work is through the nonprofit model, right? I mean, Restorative Justice Fund operates on donations from individual donors and foundation grants. So a lot of the work, at least at the beginning, was funded, as nonprofits are, through donations. And so you're giving your time away to people who have served lengthy times in prison but need legal representation and can't find it elsewhere. What are those people? You said that they have had their assets taken primarily, I would guess, because they didn't take that same, or they didn't have that mindset of intentional adjustment where they're going to connect outside, and other people took advantage of them. What recourse do they have when they find themselves being victims of theft or misappropriation of assets or funds or whatever the legal term might be?
So, I mean, first off, I totally understand how it can happen that if you are convicted and sentenced to a long time, you're not going to think about what happens to your 401k or, who is managing, who's going to go to your house to, pay the tax bill. So I get that you have bigger fish to fry and things to think about when you are sentenced to a lot of time in prison. And so a lot of what happens is either you go away and your stuff is kind of just laying there for a long time. And so
we were talking to Peter Borenstein when we had some technical difficulties and the call got dropped. He was telling us about some of the reasons that he understands why people who are in prison forget about the world outside and how they make themselves vulnerable to being the victims of theft. Could you continue with your description, Peter?
Sure, yeah. So what I was saying is that I get why you might not, your first priority might not be to, make sure somebody's paying your property tax bills or your mortgage, while you're, if you're facing 25 to life, which is what a lot of my clients did face. So, the way that these, the kind of cases I get happen are either, A, you go to prison and your stuff is just kind of out in the wind. And it can happen where the longer it's not really being managed by anyone, the higher chance that somebody might take it, or it might, there's a lot of law firms these days who are kind of looking at the title rolls to see, if a property is being foreclosed on, and I've had a couple clients who have been contacted by law firms outside saying, hey, your property is about to be foreclosed on, retain us so we can make sure that you get money from the sale, and then that money never materializes. So if your stuff is just lying out in the wind when you enter custody, then that's a great opportunity for somebody to just run off with that property. And if you're in prison, it's very, very hard to A, know you've been stolen from, and then B, if you know you've been stolen from, then pursue legal action against the person who stole from you. The other way that these things typically happen is that somebody will pass away while you're in prison, who, your mom or your grandmother or something, and they'll leave property to you. And that's a whole other mess because you don't know anything really about, I hear about guys who don't know that their dad died 10 years after the fact. So if somebody leaves you something and you're not out and there to kind of go through the process of getting that, of receiving your inheritance, somebody else will take it. We have a lot of cases where brothers or sisters who are also inheriting stuff will basically just take everything, including the inheritance of the incarcerated person.
That's so sad that people go through lengthy terms in prison, come back, and they have an opportunity perhaps to get up on their feet. Instead, they find themselves victimized even further. How are you able to help those people, Peter?
Yeah, so I mean, we help them by representing them in either the negotiations towards getting that property back. We're not trying to inflict more damage on folks. Often these cases are kind of less about the money and more about family stuff. And so lawsuits make those family issues worse, to say the least. So, we first try and help guys once we determine that they have been stolen from. We try and facilitate a negotiation to just say, hey, look, this thing happened. It may have happened 20 years ago. It may have happened 10 years ago, but what you did isn't right. He's coming out or she's coming out, or maybe they're still inside. But regardless, they have property rights and they deserve whatever, was taken from them. And then if those negotiations don't go well, which is often the case because people who are used to, kind of getting away with something with no consequences will become very defensive when they are kind of identified as somebody who's done something wrong. Then we use the legal system. And then, so a lot of the cases that we do involve, real property, so houses, and then there's a lot of trust litigation, and probate litigation. So when you inherit something, the inheritance has to go through the probate courts. And, often guys aren't even aware that the probate courts are the way that you receive your inheritance. So we help incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people navigate the probate system to make sure that they get their inheritance.
So how do people connect with you? You said that you were volunteering or spending a lot of time in Halfway House and working with other nonprofits. If somebody had a challenge that you're describing and that you offer assistance with, how do they connect with you?
So there's a couple ways. We started going to halfway houses and working with nonprofits here in Los Angeles that do reentry stuff because that was the easiest way to get to formerly incarcerated people and raise awareness about this issue. And so now we've also started working with guys who are incarcerated now. And so we have there's a number, you can call a number from prison to talk to me about legal issues related to theft while you're incarcerated. And you can also send me letters to, again, kind of identify that you're somebody who's inside who needs this particular type of legal help.
Is your practice limited to the state of California, or do you represent people from all over the country?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, it's only me. So I'm an attorney licensed in California, and so what that means is that I can't practice in other states. I do know, though, that this is an issue that's happening to prisoners in other states, and I'd love to start building the capacity for other lawyers in other states who are kind of interested in working with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people to cut their teeth on these types of legal cases. But yeah, for right now, I can only litigate in California.
I reached out to Peter Borenstein primarily because I read a very favorable article about him that was published in the Marshall Project, and he was able to help somebody. I'd love for you to give us a kind of case study of what happened there and the type of result that you were able to get for your client.
Sure. So the Marshall Project was about two clients and they're actually my very first clients. They were the two first guys I met while I started doing these free legal clinics at a halfway house here in Los Angeles, and they were literally the first two guys I met. And both of them had been down 20 or 25 years for second-degree murder. And both of them had gotten out recently within the last year or two. And this was in 2015. And so one of the guys has a really good example of what can happen when you're away. He was a guy, he has 5 brothers, 2 of whom, including him, were incarcerated. And their mom had always said that they would have the house when she passed away. It was always clear to all the brothers that they would have a place to live and it would be mom's house. And so while my client was incarcerated, one of his brothers kind of became the go-to for his mom, kind of responsible for her and taking care of her. And kind of through a variety of, for lack of a better word, shady maneuvers, 4 days before she passed away, the brother who had been taking care of her transferred the house into his name and effectively cut out the rest of the brothers from ownership of their mom's house. And didn't really tell anyone about it, and just kind of told everyone that it was fine and that, they just need to make some repairs and the house was still in the family. So then fast forward 10 years later, my client gets out and is excited to move into this house and, for obvious reasons. And so the brother the responsible brother who kind of did the shady thing kind of led him on for a while about, oh, he's just got to make some repairs, or there's some tenants there already, but, oh yeah, you're definitely going to move in. And then one day my client passes by the house and sees a for sale sign and says, well, I didn't, no one told me that this house was being sold. I don't want to sell this house. And then from that point, he kind of realized that this lie had been clouding the whole dynamic with his brothers for years. And that's when he started doing his own research. He actually filed a complaint on his own, representing himself first, but still is kind of a testament to kind of the research that he did, because he identified kind of before any lawyers got on the scene that this shady thing had happened. And then I met him about 9 months later and, did my own research, verified that yes, indeed, this house had effectively been stolen from him. And then I got on the case and we moved from there. We settled the case last year in April 2016, and made all the brothers owners of the house. So that's kind of, and it was the first case, right? So it was the first case. It was the first case that we won. My client and his brothers are now owners of that house, and that's really important because it kind of shows that these things are happening, and that also that the way that they happen, the way that they're stolen from the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, is a really sloppy, obvious thing, right? If anyone had looked at these title records or any of the deeds, they would have seen that something very strange had gone on. But they need a lawyer often to, make sure that legal recourse is effective. So that's what he did, and he's the owner of his mom's house now.
There was a second case, as I recall reading about, of where the client's defense attorney actually absconded with his resources. Can you tell, am I correct in that? And that was your other case?
Yeah. And so that case is the second case that we took as lifer. And that case is much earlier in the process. But the story there is that my client, and this is an example of how even if the way that incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people are stolen from is really sloppy, often time is a big factor, right? And 25 years inside, that makes things a lot harder when you get out to get what's yours. But essentially, my client in this case, he had been living on the streets and living pretty hard for a really long time. He won a workers' comp settlement, which his lawyer helped him get, and it was around $44,000. And my client, when he was presented with this check, essentially the lawyer said, well, look, what do you want me to do with your share? And my client said, I am an addict. I'm living on the streets. If you give me $44,000 right now, I'm going to kill myself, right? I think he made a mature and smart decision to say, look, I can't deal with that money right now. So, what my client alleges, and, it seems like a reasonable thing, was that he said, look, I can't take that money right now. You're my lawyer. Please keep it in trust with me. For me, that's what lawyers do, and I'll take $4,000 right now and go cash it. I don't have a bank account. I don't have an ID. I don't have anywhere to put $40,000, and keep the rest in trust. And so, that's what we're alleging happened, that the attorney kept the $40,000 in trust for my client, and then my client took $4,000 and he bought a car. And and after that, my client didn't really talk to this lawyer. You know, he's still on the streets. He was still living hard. He was still, you know, addicted to drugs and kind of not, you know, living above board. And so for 6 years, it's kind of just in that world, and then catches a case for second-degree murder. And so he gets convicted. He's sentenced to 25 years to life. And at that moment, he says, okay, I want to have control of this money now. And so he tries to reach out to the lawyer. The lawyer is gone, has basically disappeared. And that was in 1991. And so my client was down for 25 years, 26 years. Remember this the whole time, but, you know, understandably got kind of caught up with the fact that he was in prison. You know, couldn't, as the years went by, he couldn't really devote, you know, 24 hours a day to trying to find this guy. Plus, prison makes it very, very hard for you to find anyone outside. And so when he got out, though, he, you know, the first thing he did when he got out was he went to the office where he collected this $4,000 from his attorney in 1986. You know, obviously the office was not the lawyer's office anymore. He had no idea where the lawyer was. But, you know, just wants his $40,000. And so I met him at the halfway house too, and he told me the story, and it, you know, made sense to me that, you know, if a lawyer, you know, this lawyer sees this, you know, clearly homeless man who is trusting him and, you know, takes the $40,000 and puts it in trust, and then this guy goes away for 25 years, what's stopping him from just saying, well, that money's mine now, you know? And that is a much more reasonable explanation than what the lawyer is alleging, which is that he gave my client a check for $44,000 and then never saw him again. So that case is still in its early stages. We still don't have a trial date yet, but it's also kind of, I think, a good example of like how easy it is to fleece incarcerated people.
Incarcerated people a lot of times become vulnerable because they don't have access to good communication. They don't have access to the telephone, certainly to email, at least not in the way that we do out here in society. But besides that, as you described earlier, Peter, when they go inside, they've got more serious issues hanging over their heads, such as the loss of their liberty, separation from the people they love and the people who love them. And it's difficult to comprehend it all. And that's why we're very grateful to people like Peter Borenstein, who has devoted his career to helping those people who are really vulnerable and need help. And Peter, I want you to know that this podcast is broadcast into every state prison in California. So although you don't have a national practice, you have more than 100,000 people in the state of California that will have access to this podcast. And I just want to thank you for reaching out. Maybe you could give a little bit of contact information on how those prisoners who have issues where they feel they may have been victimized by fraud or theft or lost their assets, how might they, what steps can they take to reach you directly? Is it an address, a phone number, or what?
Sure. Yeah. And so first of all, I want to really appreciate you for giving me this opportunity. It's been difficult, to say the least, to reach guys inside and raise awareness about this issue of theft among prisoners. And one thing that we'd really love to do is just get an idea about how often this happens to guys and women who are incarcerated. And we think it's as much as a third of California's prison population, but that's just anecdotal. And so, you know, we really love to hear from people who are inside now to learn about their experience, you know, either not getting the results of an inheritance or not being able to access property that they had before they went inside. And so the easiest and best way to reach the Life or Legal Clinic is by writing me a letter. And the address is P.O. Box 885, Culver City, California, 90232. I read every letter that comes there, and I almost certainly will at least respond and let you know if it's an issue that I can help with. But we really love to hear from people who are inside in California state prisons about, their experience with their property, managing their property from inside. And we'd love to hear about if they've been stolen from. And if so, then we want to represent them.
Well, we want to help you. I will definitely provide a link back to with the address of Peter Borenstein. And we encourage you to write him if you have been the victim of fraud or theft while you're in prison in California. Reach out to him. This is an individual who's devoting his career to helping the incarcerated and the formerly incarcerated. And maybe you might want to reach out to Peter before you go into the system if you've got assets that you're somewhat concerned about being vulnerable to. Are there steps that you can take, Peter, to protect them before they go in?
Sure. So, that's kind of, I think, where we'd like the practice to go. Working with criminal defense attorneys and working with, folks like you, Michael, who, are interacting with guys before they enter custody. It's something that we haven't really done yet, but we'd really love to work on. If you are facing, a long sentence and are about to enter custody, you can send me a letter at that address. You can also email me if you have access to email. My email address is peter@brnstn.org.
Excellent. We will plug that into the show notes, and we'll be back tomorrow with another inspiring guest. Peter, I want to thank you for giving us this time. I know your time is very valuable representing so many people, but it's important for us to communicate this message of hope and inspiration to people who are living sometimes without hope and inspiration. We will be back tomorrow with another inspiring guest. If you want more information on how Prison Professors can help you, please visit prisonprofessors.com or text the word Prison Pro to 44222. On behalf of my two partners, Sean Hopwood and Justin Paperny, I thank you for listening. Back tomorrow. Thanks.